Welcome. I have two musicians turned polymaths here today. I'm speaking of none other than my brother by blood, same mother and father. That is Khalil Jackson, who currently is a uh, most of the time in cyber intelligence. He works in that field in the private sector and for the government of the United States. And the other brother from another mother is none other than the one and only Lawrence Patrick III. And he's worked in many sectors of America in the on the mission of improving the landscape of this nation. And he's worked in education, he's worked in tech, he's worked in journalism, and he is a true polymath. So it's great to welcome both of these gentlemen or getting them on the call at the same time. So that's a little minor miracle right there. So without any further ado, I'd like for both of them to just go into um, the state of affairs with Black men and women and people of color, Latinos, in the corporate environment in America in 2020, pre the George Floyd murder. Have you could say however you want to say it, or the the violent police in in tactics of our law enforcement, but pre George Floyd and all the protests that are going on in America and post. Um, but what are your thoughts pre or your experiences coming from Detroit? Now, all of us grew up in Detroit, Michigan, but coming out of Detroit, which was predominantly a Black city, and your experiences growing up, what opportunities were available to you, and go on. So, Lawrence, why don't you take the lead with that? Lawrence Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you frame it in sort of pre and post, I think that's a really smart way to think about it. I do feel like this is a significant event. It's an inflection point. It was pointed out to me yesterday by Howard Fuller, one of our great activists in the country. The inflection points go both ways. It can be a positive inflection point or a negative inflection point. It's not automatically a good thing. It could also, embolden people who, feel like this actually creates an opportunity to be more restrictive or more oppressive. That has yet to be seen. But I think the point is that it's smart to frame it and think about it as pre and post, because this is a major shift, a major turning point for many folks, particularly folks working in large organizations and in corporate America, because this is the first time I think it's really been a true statement that many organizations across the board feel obligated to have the difficult conversation, to issue a public statement, to actually have to address their employees, as well as their customers that they serve, and talk about not just race, but actually talk about this in a more substantive way, because this is not a small thing. This is not a minor thing. This is not simply a matter of discrimination or simply a matter of profiling. There's a very deep wound here. There's a very deep pain that will not be resolved by making a donation to the right organization or pledging to hire a certain number of Black executives or something like that. I think the reality is starting to set in for a lot of people, at least what I'm hearing from my vantage point here in Silicon Valley, is starting to set in that this is going to be a long struggle, and that this is going to be an existential struggle. And for many folks, particularly a lot of white executives, this is the first time they're really thinking about it in a rigorous way. Black executives are weary, they've They've thought about this for years, but for a lot of white executives, this is the first time they're really being confronted to really have to think about it. And last thing I'll say about that is an example of what I'm talking about is, Ann Wojcicki, who is the founder and CEO of 23andMe, which is a technology company that uses, just a small saliva sample, to be able to, uh, you know, crunch your genome and actually give you a pretty detailed breakdown of your DNA. That's what they do. She sent out an email as part of the corporate statement for 23andMe, and in the email, it was very heartfelt, very honest. She said, I don't have any black executives. I don't have any black directors across my whole company. And while on one hand, it was very powerful and refreshing to see an executive step forward and be honest about the situation, it was also very disheartening. I mean, someone that smart, that intelligent, who literally, I mean, if anybody in the world understands that, race is not race should not be used to divide. It should be the person who founded a company about human DNA. Like, she literally understands this. So for her to, just be starting from square one on this whole thing of thinking about it, it tells you that we have a really, really long way to go.
I mean, I love the honesty. There was a statement recently by, speaking of corporate addresses, and one that's kind of uncommon that it took me a little bit by surprise. But at some point, when I will post the link of Ben and Jerry's, I don't know if you saw their public statement.
Yes.
It was extremely robust and profound, and something that you would not. It sounded like a black person actually wrote that.
Mhm.
He just was like, okay, yes, because it basically addresses, like, America's not going to heal until they address that, it was built on slavery and all of the tactics that go around enslaving people. That's what the nation was built on. And it's a very flawed way to think about it, but it's the truth. And so there will not be any healing. There will not be any wounds that close. Uh, the inequities, the inequalities will not change unless that is addressed first. So even if you go back to the conversation of reparations, because it always murmurs in like the distance, like it's like that distant ghost is like reparations.
Right.
Someone asked me, so what is the change, Ali? What's the change? I said, how about, you know, you give me opportunity, you give me some seed money, and whatever the business is, you give me some support and opportunities and 300 years of free labor from a labor force. And I said, okay, that's cool. How about that? Can we start with that? Like,
Yeah. I mean, what we
I mean, I know
what we need is part three. We need Reconstruction part three. We need reparations, we need reconstruction and reconciliation. We need a massive federal and state legislative package that tries to clean up the aftermath and unfinished business of Reconstruction after the Civil War. Now, it might feel weird to go back to 1865, but the problems that we experience today, you're exactly right. It flows from the origins of the country and the history of the country. And unless we address the fact that there were some aspects of Reconstruction that were highly successful, but there were a lot of aspects of Reconstruction that just didn't work. And we're experiencing the result of that today. It's their direct line. What we really need is we need a huge, massive legislative effort to create policy change at the federal level and the state level to address it. We got to have reparations. We're going to have very similar actions around Reconstruction, around a meaningful takeover of government institutions that are not working properly. It could look like rebooting the police entirely. It could look like changing the oversight of police so that it's not tied to local government. It may need to be actually managed in a completely different system. That's the kind of level of reconstruction and kind of radical reboot we will have of this country and our society if we want to reach reconciliation. And reconciliation has to be a fact-finding commission. It has to be an apology. It has to be substantive. It can't just be an acknowledgement, which is what we've received essentially up until this point. Is simply an acknowledgement that there's some pain and acknowledgement that there's some disagreement. If you read most of the corporate statements, they're about acknowledgement. That's not what anyone is asking for in 2020. We don't actually need acknowledgement. We need change.
Right.
Khalil, I'd like for you to maybe share a little bit of your personal story with corporate America, because you're kind of an anomaly. I mean, both of you are. I mean, different paths. But Khalil, you actually worked your way up through corporate America, which is not really common, especially for a Black man. Like, to be in a high management position, it's pretty phenomenal. And I know you're my brother, and I know a little bit, but it's a story that's worth sharing, or at least a little bit. Like, you could give us the Cliff Notes version. I don't even know they even still have Cliff Notes.
Sure. So, listen, it's great to be here with you and with Lawrence, and, all the history that we've had together and the shared experiences, which are important. Now, the United States of America has some additional shared experiences that they're finally talking about together. Those things are important. But to answer your question first, so my corporate America time started in the late 90s when I joined Morgan Stanley in my early 20s. I had served several roles at Morgan Stanley, and I was pretty unique in the fact that I couldn't afford college, right? I couldn't afford to go to school. A lot of people have that privilege. I didn't. And so I joined Morgan Stanley, and the only reason I was able to join that team after a technical interview, because what I used to do is I used to go on interviews, and should be told, hopefully the statute of limitation doesn't apply, but I used to go on interviews, and what I recognized that I need to get a job, and the only way that's going to get a job is that they let me in the door. But if they let me in the door, I was convinced not only was I going to learn something, but I was going to be able to convince them through true knowledge that I know what I'm talking about, and I can make a contribution to their bottom line and to their initiatives and to their mission. So I would go on interviews and listen to the question they asked. Most times I didn't know what I was talking about, or I didn't know the answer to the question. After the interview, after not getting that job, I go and I'd sit in Barnes & Noble on 6th Avenue, when it used to be over there, 6th Avenue in the 20-somethings. I would sit on the floor and I would look up answers in the books, right? Because the library didn't have the latest books. You get the latest books from Barnes & Noble. I can't afford to buy it, but I can go there and read it for free. Thank you, Barnes & Noble. And I got my answers that way, right? And so eventually I got a job at Morgan Stanley, got an offer. I started at the bottom, and as a floor support guy, I went to a management role. I had a variety of roles in support and operations for the research division, for the investment banking division, sales and trading. I ran operations and engineering teams. I ran architecture teams. I did technology risk. I did cybersecurity. I did business development. I've worked on several deals, brought companies public with the investment bankers that I work with. And so I did all those things. And then, of course, I go and I take a leave of absence. And I'm saying, hey, boss, I'm going to go ahead and enlist in the Army. I enlisted in the Army. Went to officer candidate school down in Fort Benning, got a commission in the Army as a second lieutenant. I've done 2 tours in Afghanistan. I spent 18 months of my life over boots on ground in Afghanistan, serving with special operations forces and also with small teams in Eastern Afghanistan through that time. And this is all for the coalition missions that we have over there with NATO, but accomplishing things. And then I came back and I helped stand up the operational arm of Army Cyber Command, which is the largest military branch, the Army Cyber Command, in cyber mission set. So I helped do that. I worked for a general there, and I came back to the corporate world after the leave of absence, and I just kind of kept going in and out. So we talk about my journey in that time. Before that, and people that are listening to this may hear phrases like, "Oh, well, they're not a culture fit," or "They're not ready yet," right? Those are codes, and people that hear this will know those codes.
Right.
So you're not a culture fit, but there are no bullet points behind that to describe why you're not a culture fit. Or they may say, "You're not ready yet." Okay, what is it that I need to do to be ready? Usually, that's your response. Oh, well, you just need time. Well, no, you need color, or you need the lack thereof. And I think that is what the challenge has been in my time in corporate America. And when, my time in financial services, if they couldn't usually use the color thing very overtly, they switched over to using well, you've been on military leave, so you can't do that. Of course, there's a law against that too. So all of these things certainly have an impact on my perception of corporate America. But before I hand it back, I want to kind of respond to a couple of things about how we got here and what we were doing before George Floyd. We talk about bondage. There is a variety of different ways of bondage, and as mental issues have become more widely known and psychological challenges have become more widely known, we recognize the importance of mental health as well as physical health. That bondage and trauma are things that are persistent. They change people, they change your personality, they change your understanding, they change your ability to think through things, they affect your memory, they affect your heart, they affect your cardiovascular system. And there's something that they also affect that is supposed to be a genetic right to every human being on the planet, and that's hope. And so when you begin to affect hope, you begin to affect someone's human dignity. And when you affect human dignity, you don't have an equal system. The way that you do that is that you tell people that they're not a culture fit. Right? You tell people that they're not ready yet. You don't give them any context. And then they see people who are not of color take positions of leadership that you would have had no opportunity because you weren't looked at for those two reasons. So that creates trauma. And that's how we got here in the corporate world. And to quote MFK letter from jail 60 years ago, he said that, first I must confess, he's writing to clergymen, that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. He constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with you in your methods of direct action. Who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. It is by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So that's where we were before George Floyd. And frankly, that's where we are today, until we have allies who are willing to not be devoted to order, but be willing to be devoted to justice.
That's eloquently
a letter written while he was in jail after being locked up for peacefully protesting.
I was going to say something, and I don't think anyone's brought it up, and because it's not quote unquote PC. This country was built on violence, man. Like, that's what people like. Read your history books. We came over here and quote unquote befriended the Native American people that were indigenous to this land, befriended them and all whatever. What did we give them for Thanksgiving? Smallpox and disease, and took their women, and then just took the land, and then just committed genocide on them because they didn't conform to the system in which they thought. Like, I'm gonna go to Lawrence's house and they'll tell you what to do in your crib. Like, like poor hospitality. In addition to that, I wanted to bring up this statement, like, in modern day times, because just a few years ago, because sports is huge in America, right? I just saw a little interview with Jamele Hill, and I know Jamele is a friend of yours, Lawrence, and she's a great journalist.
Y'all came up together in Detroit, yes.
So there was a statement about Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem, and this is how poorly educated our citizens of this nation are. They're just poorly educated, like poor information. They're there's quotes in the national anthem in its second verse and third verse that basically say, yes, slavery is cool. Negroes are, they're Negroes. They're not people. You know, like the devaluation of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But Colin Kaepernick made a stand. He kneeled, and they were treating it like all of these NFL team owners are treating it like it's like the plantation. That's how they treat NFL football players. It's the modern day plantation. I think somebody referred to that. One of the owners kind of referred to it as like, you know, you can't have one bad apple to mess up the plantation.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, everyone kneeling on the death of George Floyd. When Colin Kaepernick was making a point to it, and the NFL just released some public service announcement, you know, with all of these players talking about Black Lives Matter. I was like, man, if that's not hypocritical and was like timely, back to what you were just saying, Khalil, or Dr. King's statement, that's why I drew on this particular thing, in the time that we think, the moderates, like when it's convenient for us for that to be some narrative, which has never been a narrative, however, it's in the face of us every day. Like, how is that, you know, how is that acceptable? So you ruin a man's career, you destroy him, basically. You destroy him. What he was saying was right all along, but you, because it wasn't timely for you.
Yeah, professional sports is especially complex and tricky because sports and the ecosystem around sports is one of the primary pathways that Black people have, particularly Black men, have to be able to um, achieve financial independence and financial freedom. You know, it's been a primary pathway for Black men to lift themselves out of poverty from the most difficult conditions, right? And to be able to, in a very short amount of time, uh, lift themselves up and their families up. And then there's like a constellation of, other people who are able to um, achieve financial independence as a result. So it's very hard to think about disrupting that pipeline, right? Like because we hurt ourselves. It's almost like similar to when people say, "Yeah, but they're tearing up the streets," but you're tearing up your own supermarket, you're tearing up your own, gas station, whatever. So it's that duality that we have as Black people in America, where um, sometimes the act of protest actually disrupts our very source of uplift. And so Colin Kaepernick's protest was especially powerful, right? Because he was putting it on the line. Like he was putting it on the line, doing it in the most public way possible. I mean, on live TV, you can't get more public than that, right? And he was also making it a choice. He wasn't pressuring anybody to do it. He was saying, I'm going to do it. And if you agree, you should do it too. It was a very powerful and very thoughtful and appropriate protest, but it also threatened to disrupt this pipeline, right? And I think, where we go from here is, I think a lot of athletes are going to have to do some soul searching and look in the mirror around, do they have a general strike? Like now is the time. Like if there's ever a time for Black athletes to come together, right? Now is the time for Black athletes to look at their white teammates and say, we need to do a general strike. We need to shut down all professional sports as a way to make everyone understand how this significant this is. It can't be a few select players here and there taking a knee.
The Lawrence, you sharing that story and the way you framed it, it puts it in perfect perspective of plantation tactics and mentality. Because you can't have one Black man kneeling, corrupting, like, no, we got to keep y'all in line. Y'all can't get out of line. Like what Trump said in his speech, we have to dominate. You need to dominate a situation for people to protest? Like, what are we dominating thoughts now?
Yeah, the dominate the battle space disposition was aside from being completely inappropriate, right? No matter what you're talking about, you don't talk about dominating a battle space and like with having the United States of America akin to a battle space unless it's occupied by an enemy. I mean, that's just something you don't do. We dominated the battle space
Slipped up.
so
Because we're the enemy.
That's right. But I mean, and I think it's very telling, and from a political standpoint, it's very telling of the polarization that people choosing party over anything else, and that we weren't like that before. At least I don't think that we were. I mean, when we were growing up, if someone, when I in the 90s, when I became a little bit more aware of political structures, I could talk to somebody who's a Republican, would be cool. But now it's just so ridiculous, and that is, I mean, a lot of ways it's a result of the relaxing of regulation laws for news, where it effectively allowed 24-hour news and all these things to exist, because it relaxed the fact that you had to actually, you didn't have to report stuff that was 100% factual and factual checked anymore. They had TV news that was the days of Ted Koppel and I think the other folks, but you guys see the point. From the 80s, you don't have that kind of news anymore. You have news that are entertainment shows. That's not news.
I also feel, I did bring this up, I feel like our generation, our voice, it's not been set up for us to have an actual platform in the paradigm shift in leadership. As older people get older, they turn it over. It's like a natural handoff.
Right.
And I feel like because of greed inside of corporate America, inside of just the way the system has worked, lobbies have ever become more influential in democracy. It's like if you have a lobby, it's basically you can't have a democracy in a lobby. It's like they kind of cancel each other out. It doesn't, not really a democracy. So if whoever's check is bigger, I mean, they get the voice.
Right.
So with our leadership, it's not been really clearly handed off to us to actually lead or empower our generation of people. And I'm talking about people that were born in the 70s, people to actually be like given the reins, like, look, it's your time, because now we meet the age of, we're at the age of still having some youth, but having some wisdom. And that's the golden age. You still have some energy and you have some experience.
Right.
And the way I see things playing out, you just cut that off. It's like we're like cut off at the knees.
Right.
So, whatever aspirations and dreams you have, like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's like generational. The pyramids just didn't pop up overnight. That's generational. So if you want something built, and what's really sad is for our mother, like Khalil, she sent us a text today saying, this reminds me of the 60s and the 70s, the early 70s of what's going on in America now. And if they can see that, that means on a certain level, you mean we fell back into that, or it never went away? It just looked like it went away, like equality.
I mean, I would say a lot of that is because, I mean, the only way that this is going to work, we can't do it by ourselves, right? We don't hold the keys to power. We just don't. The only way that we're going to be successful is having allies. And those allies have to be allies beyond just words and just saying, oh, we're going to pay, we're going to contribute some money, we're going to give it to a nonprofit and we'll be done with it. Nah, right. Man.
Right.
Nah, bro. It's got to be allies who are willing to recognize that we will not be silent and that they will listen to us. We have to recognize that we have allies who are willing to be uncomfortable, right? Because the human condition generally abhors discomfort. And, the problem is that all this was born in discomfort. So only way to fix it is that we have to go back to that point of discomfort and then come together and then move forward as one with our allies. And so, the onus is upon all of us to find out who those allies are and make sure they understand our story, understand our feeling, so that they have that shared experience. We saw recently a man murdered on live TV or, social media, wherever you happen to see it. A man was murdered on TV, plain and simple. He wasn't the only one that was murdered on live TV. I saw a clip recently on the internet with someone that spliced together a lot of the police brutality, and right before they showed the George Floyd murder, they showed Rodney King. And if you haven't seen that footage in a while, and you go back and you look at it, it is very, very graphic. You literally have a man laying on the ground and cops running up and hitting him with a baton, taking turns. It is graphic. The protect and serve became into the oppress, silence. And so, for those who know, it's all about the allies, it's all about making sure they understand the story. And our time is short. We only have a little bit of time before this passes away and people go back to the way it was, and they go back to their order. So that's the encouragement I have for people.
I think that's critical. And I think also, people understanding their own ancestors and their own, links to the history of this country. I mean, it's really important. A lot of times, white people in America don't want to know. They either don't want to know because they don't want to find out that they had ancestors who were, enriched or affiliated with the triangle trade, with the Atlantic slave trade in any way. And they just don't want to know. They don't want to be able to have that link. Or, they just kind of don't really think about it. Like it's not like a priority. And I think that is going to have to change a little bit because, 1 million people died in the Civil War. The American Civil War is by far the most, it's the greatest sacrifice the country has ever made in terms of bodies and energy and resources for a cause. You had, roughly 500,000 people on each side of the ledger in the North and the South die. The descendants of those people are largely still here in this country. So there are a lot of white people. There's a lot of potential allies whose ancestors fought and died in the Civil War, fighting to eliminate the institution of slavery in this country. And I feel like there's so many people who just don't know. I mean, if you ask people if they know what their ancestors were doing during the Civil War, most Americans do not know. I feel like part of our turning point is also for people to look back and understand that they have a responsibility, not just because they're personally confronted or offended or upset by these images that they see. They have a duty. Like your freedom that you have today is soaked in the blood of your ancestors who fought and died for this country to be able to be here. This is not a Black problem. We should not accept the burden or the ownership to solve this problem or to reform America or fix a broken America. This is everybody's problem. And I love what Khalil said about allies, because I really think that's the key to being able to turn this around. We're going to have those descendants of the Union Army. We're going to have those descendants of the people who were abolitionists, those white people who helped operate the Underground Railroad. All of their descendants, now's the time. They got to ante up and kick in.
Well, you know that, the people who had slaves or hundreds or thousands of slaves, they were the people that ran this country from in the beginning. I mean, this whole nation was built on free labor. That's what the whole thing is about. It's economic. So what Khalil says is, I'm going to take it a step further. They've been listening. No one's. It's not like they listen or they hear you, but they're not acting. They have to mobilize. Like now, you must put your money up and your mouthpiece up, your megaphone, and it's uncomfortable and it's going to ruffle your feathers and it might cost you hundreds of billions of dollars or whatever it's going to cost. But that's the price of your past, or that's the price of this situation. Right. And, it's beyond that. Like you talk about reform, like that reform is not the right word. There has to be a new word. Or like you say, Reconstruction 3, it has to be carried out.
It's a reboot. Yeah.
It's a complete reboot. The system doesn't work on multiple levels. Not just this level, or like the criminal justice system or or the judicial system or the law enforcement or like profile. Like it's far deeper. Like when you start to talk about inequities,
Yeah.
It's on another. It's so many sectors of humanity, like what Khalil put. It's you can't ignore it anymore, and people have just been pacified because you have a little bit of a job. And why this is really crucial, like now, why is it happening now? Like people don't understand why it's not happening now. Because what are the unemployment numbers? They said 40 million. Somebody, a real analyst said if it's 40 million, it's really 80 million.
Right. Right.
So you have 80 million people out of work. There's no jobs really to come back to. The country's in flux of whether or not things are opening back up. They're not opening back up. Some things open, some things aren't. Right. Everyone's working mobile. So those who have jobs and the young people are really activated because no one's in school. No one ain't got no job. No one's got any money. So the frustration, everyone's been locked up for over 3 months. That is a perfect recipe to be out here protesting on stuff that you can't. It's deplorable. Like if you're not making a stand now, it's like, you know, stand for nothing, fall for anything.
That's right. That's right. This is not this is not simply, restart the computer. This is,
Restart the
shut down, cold boot, firmware upgrade, and then go down to the bare metal and install the upgraded OS. I mean, this is a pretty significant rebuilding of our concept of what this country is if we truly want to fix this problem. It's not going to be simple, and it's going to require a lot of white people to participate in making the change. It can't simply be black people in the streets protesting. That is a necessary component, but what's more necessary than that is white Americans who are allies, who are willing to use their money, their monetary resources, their votes, their voting power, and their physical bodies. I mean, I can't say it strongly enough that the magnitude of the Civil War is really lost on us in a modern context. The idea of that many white people sacrificing, being willing to actually fight and die for the concept of having this country be together and be free and eliminate slavery as an institution within this country. That's such a powerful idea. We have to replicate that same call to action, that same level of energy, and that same willingness to sacrifice bodies. When I see the protests, I don't see what I need to see. What I need to see is like the first 10 rows need to be like middle-aged white ladies. Like that's who we need in the first 10 rows. Like black people shouldn't even be at the front line of any of this. This is not really our fight. This is like the Civil War version 2, really is what it is.
We've been at the front lines the whole time.
Front lines.
Enduring it. I mean, our generation. I mean, let's just talk about.
We don't have the numbers. There are not enough of us in this country to create the change that is actually required to fix this problem. It's a very simple math problem. Now, we have the conviction, right. We have the tenacity, the resilience, the intelligence. We have all the other things. But this is a mathematical problem. You need a certain amount of money, you need a certain amount of votes, and you need a certain amount of bodies. And I guarantee you, if you body these neo-Nazis, they can be bodied easily. When they stormed the state capitol in Michigan, and they had the governor hold up in the state capital of Michigan, where we're both from, where all of us are from, what should have happened is there should have been a contingent of other white people from Michigan to meet them at the right. But it should have been like 8-1. They should have been outnumbered like 8-1. And then it would have been a wrap. And then it would have gone away. The problem is when they get up inside the Capitol and they feel like, they have the numbers and they have the power, then this thing starts to reinvigorate and grow out of control. It's like a cancer.
Yeah. And I want to, I think to that point, as we see our white leaders step up in the community and become true allies, that means Black people need to get behind them.
Yes,
help empower them.
I totally agree with that. One of the things that really upset me, like we should all be down with Taylor Swift for stepping up to say something. She did not have to do that, right? So when someone like that steps up, they have to get the embrace. When Eminem came out and he had a very powerful statement, he essentially said, listen, if you're white and you think you're one of my fans and you support Trump, F you. Delete all my stuff, burn all my stuff, because you're not my fan. I don't want you as a fan. That was a very powerful statement. He didn't have to make that statement. He's already at, the peak of his career, all of that stuff. He doesn't have to do that. But I mean, he's from Detroit. So he understands. He's one of those people who would have been fighting with the Union Army, no problem. And so when these people step up, they have to receive the embrace. On that point, I was just having a conversation today with one of my friends, and I said, you know what? I realized today, we have to stop ridiculing white people for saying, I have a black friend. We need every white person to have a black friend, because one of the first steps to becoming an ally and gaining conviction is actually understanding the black experience and having empathy for black people. And how does that even begin if you don't have any black friends? So we have to step away from that, and we have to shift our energy and our gears to embrace our allies and support them and cheer them on to become deeper and more entrenched in this struggle if we want to win.
Yeah, and I would be remiss, we're talking about the Civil War, and I'd be remiss as an Army officer by that comment about Robert Gould Shaw. So for those who don't know, Robert Gould Shaw, 54th, exactly right, 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. He was a full-bird colonel in the Union Army who died at 25 years old. But he made a stand. And he was commissioned to command that infantry regiment, and all of the African Americans and black freemen that joined that regiment were supportive of him. And so, like they did in a very physical sense, like they did in a very literal sense, we also need to do that in a very physical and a very literal sense, not just figuratively. So we have those allies, Norris, to your point. We need to get behind that colonel. We need to follow suit and carry the flag. And I think that, one of the things, and I can't remember the specifics details, it's been a minute since I really studied it, but one of the things that the Southerners, the people who flew the Confederate flag, said that they were trying to insult Colonel Shaw because they buried him with his Negro. But that was an honorable thing for him, to be buried with his soldiers. And I think that says something. As we have those people willing to be buried with us, we also need to be willing to stand with them and to potentially be buried with them. We're all in it together, and the only way that we make it ahead is those allies. They're the ones that will help us heal. Ali, you mentioned, we got to pay for things in the past, but that's about paying for our future. We really want to exist as a country that we can be, as a country that has potential to live to greatness that our Constitution says we can.
It's not our future, it's their future.
Yes.
It's the collective future. If you want this world to exist, it's a collective thing. I mean, there's so many layers. At this point, it's overwhelming. People are just caught up in the graphics. And see, that's how you get people. Like, you're just getting into this is the beginning. So you can't ignore police brutality anymore. Like, for us, it's just a reality. You grew up in a black city. We have police brutality from black police officers just because we're young and black. You young and black, you're a menace to society. There are movies and films on it. Boys in the Hood.
Well documented. It's well documented.
There's no question about it. In every generation, it's the same thing. I mean, even though, kids are more, privileged, things are, the world has changed in many ways, but in a lot of ways, it's the same. In a lot of ways, it's the same. And we can't go on for our children. Like, I have grown children now. I have young men. I have a son that's in the Marines. I mean, you probably can go into the discrimination inside of structures like that, into the military. You could go in, like, racism is at the very core of America, and it's never openly talked about. It's like what Khalil says. It's like, oh, you're not a good fit. It's creative language. Not a good culture fit. Um, Not a team player. Black people are lazy. I mean, we could go on and on. Like every narrative that's negative about black people. Oh, I don't know about his work ethic. Oh, your commitment. I mean, you name it. Oh,
Yeah, I think all of these things change, when you have a powerful and organized group of allies who are willing to provide leadership and sacrifice. I think all of this can change. But part of the kind of underlying conversation here is, how does America purge these neo Nazis, these neo Confederates? How do we purge? Because sometimes, you have to fight the war twice. You have the first time, and then you got to come back and fight again because the first time wasn't sufficient. That does happen. It's happened throughout history. You have World War I, well, then you got to go and have World War II. I mean, sometimes that does, for things to really be definitive for a while. And I think we're in a situation in our country where, we had the Civil War. It was relatively short, but a massive sacrifice and loss of life on both sides. But we never fully really healed from that. Like we didn't have even though it was a very definitive outcome at the time, the descendants of the losing side, from that battle, they have trained their descendants to hate, and they've tried to preserve some of those ideas some of those examples that you just gave, Ali. So they've been passed down from generation to generation. So now we have a problem where the cancer has come back and we have to purge the cancer from the body. We can't use chemotherapy again because that's going to kill the patient. So now we're like, what do we do? We have this cancer in the body. We must somehow figure out and come up with a plan for how do we, identify these cancerous cells throughout our country and then purge them from the body. I honestly don't know what that looks like. I don't know if that means that we designate a state in the United States as like a no man's land. And if you really want to have, your all white, nation, you can move there, but you can't have a gun, but you can move there. And if you want to leave and come in the rest of the United States, you got to have a passport and wear ankle monitor or something. I don't know what it is. But I mean, that might be one solution. Maybe it's just you got to deport people. You got to say, hey, you're not compatible and you got to go. You got to seek asylum in some other country and go somewhere else. Maybe that's it. But at some point, there has to be a very practical discussion about how do we deal with the fact that throughout our country, we now have been infected with all of these neo-Nazis, these KKK people, these neo-Confederate people. These people want to resurrect the concept of the Confederacy. They have to go. And the only way we're going to actually be able to have that kind of conversation is if we can get a critical mass of white allies talking in that way, and removing some of this softer language, showing solidarity. We don't need solidarity. We need to talk about how we're going to get rid of these neo-Nazis who have infiltrated our police force and police unions and prosecutor offices and the U.S. Senate and the White House.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, that is the conversation. And who is the voice of black leadership? Like what you said earlier, the voice of the black leadership might be a middle-aged white woman, or the voice of black leadership is, a white guy, definitely a white male that has respect of the establishment.
Yeah, I think black leadership in 2020, a lot of it looks like, figuring out who can actually resonate and break through and be compelling to white leadership. Because honestly, white people need a leader. They're the ones that need a leader.
That's actually very true.
Right now, not black America. If white America had sufficient leadership, we would not be in this situation.
Yeah, it's like
very true. Nice, well said.
Absolutely. I mean, it's transcended black and white. Obviously, our world and what the value system is. I think America's lost just on the value of its own identity. It's like you have to reintroduce America to itself. We don't produce anything. Service-oriented society. Stealing is common. Or you have the Federal Reserve, which that's another chapter. Our people can tune in for that when we go into that. Like the economic systems are completely broken or corrupt. That's what people don't understand. Like the whole idea of selling people on an American dream that has never really existed. It maybe did, pre 60s, maybe not even. But the system is designed for a select few people to amass all the wealth. Why do you think the inequality, like, why do you keep thinking it's going in one direction? It's like a Ponzi scheme that's legal. It's like a legal Ponzi scheme. Oh, the Federal Reserve just prints money whenever they want. So how do people can afford to live? I've watched a few documentaries just on this very thing from different vantage points and perspectives to study and learn in code and language.
I mean, there's some interesting policy ideas around having a maximum wealth, a cutoff where you hit a certain amount of money, and then basically anything over that essentially gets automatically redistributed and is not your money. So that it de-incentivizes sort of an endless pursuit of dramatic wealth, and reverses the incentive to have this huge income inequality. I mean, part of the reason why we have this massive wealth gap is because there's a great incentive to continue to make money. Like Jeff Bezos has an incentive to continue to make money. I mean, that's so weird considering how much money he already has. He already has more money than he could possibly spend in his lifetime, or even all his kids, could spend in a lifetime. So why is he still working? Like, why is he still earning money? Like, that's kind of a ridiculous idea. Or someone like Warren Buffett, look at how old he is. Why is he still earning money? Like, why is he still making money? Why is Mike Bloomberg still making money? We've created a construct where there's this high incentive to continue to make. Now, I'm not against making money. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is that when you have this huge gap, it becomes much harder for the people on the bottom to make ends meet, while it becomes so much easier for the people on the other extreme to just make unlimited dollars. And so it's really almost impossible to fix that problem unless you create a policy that is, specifically targeting that and trying to fix it, and make things more equitable.
No question. The tax laws have changed tremendously over the years. In the boom of the auto industry, or the big three in Michigan, I think it was like the tax rate was like, if you made over a certain amount of millions, it was like 70%. So, I mean, just think about it. A friend of mine,
if you make a certain amount of money, I think maybe it's $1 billion, maybe $2 billion. You hit the trigger. Let me tell you, this is my idea. You hit the trigger, and then we cash you out. You get to keep that, and then we put your face on money, and we do a limited run. We do a limited print run. We put your face on the money. Everybody will know. Everybody in America know you hit it big. You're great, and now you have enough money to have a great life. Plus, you got your face on the money. End of story.
Hey, a friend of mine in the financial world, they said, "Look, 50 million. I mean, after 50 million, like what? I mean, what?" Like in a lifetime, you're gonna go through 50 million? I mean, come on, not really. I mean, you have to be like insane, but like that should be like a cap, like 100 million.
Probably a number. There's probably a number. If you analyze it, there probably is a number. There's probably a max number where it could be the cash out number. I don't know if it's 50 million, 5 billion. I don't know what the number is, but smart people could get in a room and agree, here's a number. And if we did that, right? If we did that, the societal impact will be tremendous in terms of being able to return those resources back to the community, so that more people can have a great life.
I agree, and just it doesn't put the onus on that of like dominate. You have to dominate. You must dominate.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little something around, one of the things about the United States is that obviously it's a capitalist society, but there are many that are capitalist societies. But if you take a look at the laws, And I'm going to talk about regulatory forces for a moment, especially around things like cybersecurity and privacy. And so, some of the studies that I did at NYU Law were heavily focused on privacy and public policy. So there's this concept of a shareholder theory and a stakeholder theory, right? So, shareholder theory in a nutshell is basically you kind of contribute, you're accountable back to the shareholders, which are people that are owners of that company. Right. And then there's this other one, the stakeholder theory, where you have stakeholders, like not just people that are owners of the company, but you have people that you have to work with. Like there's also customers, right? You have suppliers and vendors. So it's a little bit wider. So one of the things that you often see in Europe, and I'm thinking of things like GDPR, which is the privacy regulation in Europe, but also California, Lawrence, you're out there. We have the CCPA. One of the things that the intent of that is that it's much more geared towards the stakeholder theory. And what ends up happening is when you talk about economics and a monetary flow, it ensures that the consumer, who is a low person on the totem pole, has a measure of protections that they don't normally have in the concept of the shareholder theory. Because if all you care about is owners of the company and the shareholders, all you care about is what their goals are, which is they're investing to get their money back. So the incentive of the company, I mean, in this case, the government, is to make money for people who have a stake, who have or shareholders of the company. Now, and the shareholders of America today, we talk about race and we talk about inequality. The shareholder theory that's in place in the federal government and the federal structure of the United States of America is all about the corporations, right? Because they were declared as people, right? They get similar rights as people, from a Supreme Court ruling in early 20th century. And so they effectively have this ability to go and make as much money as they possibly can. And yes, there is monopoly suits and whether or not there is antitrust and all this sort of thing in place. But I mean, those things get drawn out. But ultimately, the United States of America is built on a shareholder theory, and that concept does not really care so much about the individual people. And so when you look at income inequality, the reason that it's greater in the United States is because we have a platform that allows you to make as much money as you want, more than you can ever spend. And then we create people like the Jeff Bezos of the world. We have the people like the Mike Bloombergs. We have the people like the Warren Buffetts. We have the people, in that area. So
they also utilize the law and loopholes to not actually have to contribute into the big pot.
That's right. That's right. So if we're going to change, I think part of it also has to be, and I think Lawrence, you made this point a little bit earlier, but to just bring it back up is, you need to be able to change the systems. There's a political element of it. We need to get behind those people who are demonstrating that leadership. Then we have to get people out, our friends who are like, oh man, ain't no good candidates out there, I'm not going to vote. No, that's the wrong answer. You're a citizen of this country, you have a duty to vote. Get out there, vote, cast your ballot. Because if you don't, your vote is already cast.
Right.
You don't show up, your vote gets cast for you. So it is not like if I don't vote, then like, okay, well, I'm just making a statement. No, you don't vote. You're messing over your fellow person. And the people who were going to be your allies, you've just basically disqualified them. Who've already said they're going to back you up. You're like, nah, man, I'm good. I don't want that. And so when we think about being able to change America from a shareholder theory to a stakeholder theory, so all the stakeholders, meaning every citizen in this country, has the ability, that's the most important thing. So it's just a few thoughts, a few comments, but I just wanted to share those. But yeah, over you guys.
That's a great point, and I'm glad that you brought it home and tied it into, corporations and ownership of corporations and how that also intersects with voting, because those are key pieces. I mean, this is a complex and multi-layered problem, and no one should think that wearing the right T-shirt or sending the right email out to your customers is going to fix this problem. That's not even a starting point. I mean, this is going to be a struggle that's going to take a long time. Frederick Douglass taught us that it must be a struggle and that it's going to take a long time. And we have to have the resilience to be able to see it through. We have to find the allies among us. We have to cultivate and grow more allies. And then the allies have to go out and recruit and make their army bigger, because ultimately this is an American problem. This is not a Black problem. Black people suffer because of this problem. We carry the cross, and we have the burden of this problem, but we didn't create this problem. This is not our problem. We inherited this problem, and it's part of the fabric of America and the history of our country. So as Americans, we all have to see this as an American problem that demands immediate and urgent action and strategy. And that's the only way we're going to be able to see our way out of this situation. You know, I am someone who believes that the future belongs to those who are willing to learn history and have a strategy. And I think this is a moment that has just been overwhelming in reinforcing that in my mind, because when you go back and you read the letter from a Birmingham jail, which Khalil quoted so eloquently, from 1963. I'm reading a book by W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, which was written in 1935 about stuff that happened in 1867. I mean, this is not new. Like, you just gotta read a little bit. And I think the events are just putting it in our face that if we don't change something, if we don't change our ways and have a more strategic approach based on rooted in history, we're going to be doomed to just repeat this cycle. So, this has been a really inspirational conversation for me. First of all, because I love both of you. We are brothers, and it's always amazing to listen to you and be able to chop it up like this. But this has just been really motivational, inspirational for me on a day when I really needed it. So, Ali, I just want to thank you. I'm grateful for inviting me and bringing us together.
It's my honor and pleasure. And I can't think of two other people that intimately have been on the journey and the struggle and have been extremely successful without the support. Like, you guys are both anomalies, both anomalies. And people should know who you are and all of the work that you've done and all of the work that you set forth to do. Um, because I mean, without people like you guys, I would be very, I would be depressed. I'd be more depressed because I know there's more of you out there like this in the world. But the two of you guys give me hope. And that's something Khalil brought up in the beginning of our conversation. Once you lose hope, that alters the human condition. The human condition is based on hope that things will improve and get better. That's why religion and prayer and spirituality is so important to humanity, because without hope, there's no life force. That's why people die. A lot of times, people are like, well, we don't know what happened to them. They lose hope.
Right.
So, with that, I'm grateful to have both of you, Lawrence Patrick the third, Khalil Jackson. It's a pleasure having you guys on, and we look forward to the next one. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.